Obviously, the people that got there first got the best sites. No surprise there. And also, they were mainly Park Place. Gene and Linda and Tony and Marilyn were Park Place artists. So they were interested in building a studio space so they could make their art. So a geodesic dome was something that could go up quickly, could be a large studio space, and they could get back to their artwork, which was what they were interested in. Jim Fowler came slightly later, and he built a house by the entrance of Libre, or someplace, and he had a much more organic approach and built a sort of hobbit house of his own design. And naturally, he was not somebody who was going to build a geodesic dome. It was much more found materials and sort of fantasy hobbit house kind of place. When we got there, in no uncertain terms, Peter Rabbit said there's no space on the lower land. If you want to live here, you have to live on the ridge. So it wasn't as if we said, oh, let's go build a house on an impassable road with no water and electricity. Won't that be fun? It was like, if you want to live here. So the people that lived on the ridge came later, and were told. Steve Rains and Pat came sometime before us, because they were starting to build when we got there in 69. Libre was started in 68, and the first domes had been built in the summer of 68. And Steve had an architectural background. He was much more into Gaudi and organic architecture, so he built an adobe. He and Pat built an adobe, but they did have an upper room with a geodesic dome on top, so that was a sort of transition place. A guy named Steve Vasey, who was also a painter, had been there before us. He did a very small dome and an A-frame on the lower land. We took psychedelics, were on the ridge. Steve Rains came along and said, why don't you build an eight-sided house built out of logs or built out of reject railroad ties. I think David might have been interested in the octagonal shape. We had both been reading a lot of Jung and reading about Jung building his tower, so we wanted to build an organic building and blah, blah, blah. So that we had no background whatsoever and no idea how labor-intensive it was, and the fact that we were building on granite or limestone and not much else. But anyway, in that sort of intuitive and irrational way, decided what we were going to build. And I think design changed a little as we go along, but we had that initial concept of an eight-sided house on the ridge with a huge boulder inside it. And the theory was the boulder was going to keep the house cool in the summer and warm in the winter.